when you are working with archival footage, you're not just trying to find particular content. You're not just trying to cover or illustrate something that somebody says. You really are trying to convey a point of view that has as many creative choices involved as any other kind of footage that you're putting together when you're making your film.
The two most important questions for me, or the three most important, I should say, are first to really have some understanding of the story the filmmaker wants to tell and how they're thinking of telling it, how much money they have to dedicate to the process, both of finding the material and then clearing it, or, sorry, Scott, making fair use of it, or, you know, some mixture of those two things. And then the next big question I have to answer is, who might have created the kind of material we're looking for? That's the most important thing in doing the kind of work I do, is to have the imagination to think, okay, if this stuff exists, why would it exist? Who would have made it, and where might it be?
We have a film archive with older material that we allow people to come in and screen. We allow people to come in and screen tapes. I mean, it's a 50-year, 60-year archive. So there's a lot of there's a lot of material that that hasn't been seen even since it was probably originally broadcast, and sometimes that's the most interesting things. But we do make things available from the nightly news, from the Today Show, Meet the Press, all things that you see broadcast on a regular basis.
You know, when I first got into business, when I'd be working on a documentary film where we were going to use archival footage, we would sort of like, I was still cutting 16. And we used to, when I was a young editor, I used to call ABC Sherman Grinberg. Remember? Yeah, I used to go over to Sherman Grinberg, and they'd have those 16 Steenbecks up, and we'd search through the footage, and we'd find this stuff, and we'd say, I need this from 1955, I need this from 1966. We'd give them a list. I didn't use an archival research, I would do it all myself. And then years later, as we started getting cutting digital, a bad habit that a lot of us editors started to do was that anytime we needed archival, something from some archival film or footage, we'd find a film, and we'd like, pirate that segment from the film. And then we'd worry about where it came from. Then we'd have to find somebody to find out where it came from and who did it, and then we'd figure out it cost too much money. And then we'd have to change it. But then when I started working for Spike in 1997 on Four Little Girls, Spike suggested that we use this archivist. And something clicked in me from that experience, which I've tried to do anytime I can afford it, or if the production can afford it. I wanted to hire the archivist day one. When you're editing archival footage into your films, you're not just trying to illustrate. It's a part of that storytelling process. So you want to find the images, you want to hear the sound that you think will help enhance the storytelling, So even now when I'm not working for Spike, as soon as I start a new film, if I can't afford a full-time archivist like Judy, I'll call Judy and ask if she knows someone who's up and coming, who we can bring on board to be both a production associate and an archival researcher. From my years of working on Eyes on the Prize, from the rise and fall of Jim Crow through when the levees broke, I've always been very fortunate that we've had wonderful archivists who were able to track down anything, not only in the archives like NBC, but in people's homes, in people's attics. All those places where archivists can dig, I mean, they can be extremely, extremely important in helping you find those things. Because, what happens sometimes with archival footage is that if you get it from a regular archive, sometimes you see the same thing over and over and over again. And then sometimes you say, I need some surprises. I don't need just the hoses in 1963. I need something else about the civil rights struggle. And a good archivist can find that.
Sometimes the thing that you think is going to be easiest to get isn't so easy to get. I mean, we made a series in 1996 about the rise of the religious right, and we started with John F. Kennedy's run for president when evangelical Christians flipped out because he was a Catholic, and he made a very famous speech to the Evangelical Association, reassuring them but also drawing a line in the sand. it was actually very hard to find a broadcastable copy of that speech, even though it had been kinescoped and kept for many years. And which leads me, so you know, the World Trade Center falling down. There was a certain period of time where you couldn't get that. Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. Some of the things that we are most familiar with you can't take for granted that you're going to be able to get them, that you're going to be able to license them, that you're going to be able to get them in a form that's reasonable. Anytime I've made an archival film, we have somehow in the course of it discovered some piece of footage or some film that somebody made which is so great and speaks to what you're coming to, but adds a whole new dimension to what you thought it was about, that you end up building at least part of your film around it. I mean, we found fabulous film that was made specifically to get evangelicals involved in politics, made in 1974 and 1975. And you know, once we saw that, we knew, hey, this is gold. This is where we're going to build it around. And we went and found the guy who made the film, and we went and found the guy who was in the film. And you know, that ends up being, it can be what your film's about. So, and there's a whole, you know, subgenre now of documentaries that really are about footage. I mean, the other great Katrina film, Trouble the Water, you know, they found this woman who had filmed all this stuff herself and built a film around it and her. So it's, and the people in the archives, if you go to them with the right thing, sometimes will come to you with that light in their eyes and say, you know, we've been sitting on this little film for however long, and you know, it's great stuff, and you know, check it out. And that can end up being what your documentary is really centered on.
I have to say, every August, about August 10th, my phone starts ringing off the hook. And guess what people are saying? Hi, we're getting our film ready for the Sundance cut, and we know all the footage we want. We found it all on YouTube and Cut Documentaries, and we need you to come in for the next 3.5 weeks and clear it all, and we only have, you know, $2,000 to pay for everything, whatever. So what I think, to me, as a long time researcher with very deep experience both in commercial archives like NBC, in public archives like the National Archives, and also, you know, calling people up, getting into their attics, getting into their basements, dealing with collectors. I get so frustrated when people cut with pre-existing cut films because it limits our sense of history and of what happened and what the stories are. And for me, I'll never forget, one of the most instructive things to me when I was a very young researcher was somebody contacted me and said, oh, we need this shot from Vietnam television history. It's from this protest at the Pentagon. Called WGBH. They have great notes on, you know, what film can it came from at what archive. I pull the reel. It's like a 2,000-foot reel at NBC, and it's hard to look at film because you can't stop and start it. You have to just kind of watch through the reel. And the shot was part of this dynamic montage of people, you know, wrangling with the police and shouting and screaming and waving banners. And the reel was like all these kids hanging out on the lawn of the Pentagon, kind of looking around, kind of seeing something was happening, running over to try to be part of it. And then I realized, you know, how just working with edited history really distorts your idea of what happened and how it happened. And you may go in thinking, I'm going to tell this story, but if, as Sam and David have suggested, you start to think about the archive at the beginning and you make part of your early process an exploration of, well, what is there? We think this is how it happened, but what can we see? You might find that it changes the story you're going to tell. Not just how you're going to tell the story, but what you actually are going to say. So I also believe start early.